Night in Kijani felt like it held its breath as Nia slipped out with a single lamp and a packet of papers. The compound was asleep, the moon thin, and the air smelled of cassava and hot tea left on porches. She did not tell anyone. In a cool, steady hand she signed a trust that wrapped the grandparents' $1 million estate in rules and locks no gossip could pry open. She wrote only 4 small words on a folded scrap and tucked it between the pages, for those they loved. Then she walked back before dawn as if nothing had happened. By breakfast the village hummed, not with the soft morning it usually knew but with a strange electric noise, neighbors leaning over fences, shopkeepers pausing with their hands on the scales, the boda drivers repeating a name like it was a secret password. Phones lit up with the rumor and a shaky video of the empty guest room where the papers had been placed. The family woke to confusion and a chill. Faces that had shared meals and complaints now sat at opposite ends of verandas. Old men who had been too proud to speak looked small. Children asked questions they were told to ignore. Greed smelled different when you could see it in the way cousins smiled too wide at old photos. In one stunned house someone whispered the estate might be lost to strangers or community projects, and another voice answered fiercely that nothing would change. Outside, under the jacaranda, Nia watched from the road, clasping her hands until they trembled, and felt the first raw lift of something bigger than fear. When Nia was small she learned the map of the family not in books but in hushes and slammed doors. She remembers a wet season when her grandfather went to Obu to settle a fence line and came back with a face that would not stop shaking. A cousin from Obu with a smooth voice and a new suit had shown up at a meeting with papers that smelled faintly of oil and other cities. He smiled like he wanted to be part of the family and then he asked the grandfather to sign a paper to clarify boundaries. The grandfather, who trusted hard and fast, signed because elders taught him to be fair and because the cousin spoke like a man of business. That night the house slept and the cousin smiled at the moon. In the morning the village noticed the message on the market board and the cousin's name began to move like a shadow. People who had watched the land for decades saw paths change, small stakes disappear, a line of trees marked with fresh paint. At meals, voices stopped when his name came up. There were letters that smelled of ink and threats that lived behind polite notes. Nia remembers her mother folding her hands until the knuckles went white, eyes fixed on a radio, listening for news she could not find. She remembers the day her grandfather tore up a paper and the cousin laughed and left town with promises he never kept. He tried to sell a slice to a developer from far away who spoke too fast and offered too much money. The family argued for weeks, then the cousin bribed a clerk in a far office and suddenly the maps in the government books did not match the maps the elders had in their heads. The hurt was not loud. It was small things, a favorite mango tree marked as someone else's, a well fenced off, a wedding cancelled because the land titles were uncertain. Children who had climbed the old granary were told to stay away. The grandfather grew quiet and smaller, and Nia watched him at dusk, hands on knees, as if he were counting losses with the sunset. Whispered betrayals taught her that a paper could be a knife and a smile could hide a plan. She learned to read the slip of a ledger the way others read faces. Those days in Obu left a scar in the family skin, the kind that puckers around the quiet parts of speech. That scar moved with Nia into adulthood, and the memory of doors closing and deals made in the smoke of tea shops became the reason she could not leave the estate to chance. Her midnight action was not sudden or cruel. It was the slow work of years of watching promises break and names change. She wanted to stop the smooth men who sold silver tongues as if they owned the world. She wanted the land to remember who planted the trees and who fed the field. The past had taught her how easy trust could be stolen, and that is why she chose to lock the papers tight and write only 4 small words that would not let old wounds be opened by hidden names again. She did not do it alone. When the village talk turned to threats and quick sales, Nia booked the first flight to Kamba and came home with a lawyer who did not smile much and did not take gifts. He arrived in the small dust airport with a leather case and a name people in the town spoke of like a shield. He asked few questions at first and listened more than he talked. He read every paper the way a mason inspects old stone. Then he set to work writing rules that would not bend. The trust he drew did not say vague things. It said exactly who could touch the money and how they must use it. No money would be paid out to individuals who asked for the land. No sale could happen. The estate would fund only projects that helped the village. Clinics, a girls' school, repairs to wells, and a place to keep the harvest safe were named as allowed uses. Each project needed a plan, a budget, and a list of local people who would run it. The lawyer wrote that the money would sit in a separate account with trustees from 3 different towns. One trustee would be someone from Kijani, one from a nearby town, and one from a charity with a clean record. Payments from the account would be made only after clear proof that the project reached a real step. If the school said it had built a wall, the trustees must inspect the wall before a single cent moved. If anyone tried to show fake papers or bribe an official, the clause would force immediate audit and send the matter to public prosecutors. The lawyer added a voters clause too. Before any large decision, the village council would meet and votes would be recorded by notaries. Every ledger entry would be open to the public at the market stall and a copy would sit in the parish office. He put in a veto against names that had tried tricks in the past. No heir could claim land if they had ever been party to a legal fraud. He demanded witnesses at every signature and required the papers be registered in several offices so a single clerk could not switch the maps. When he finished he stamped the documents with a flat face and a small smile that meant the work was done. Nia signed shaking but steady. The lawyer faxed copies, left sealed envelopes with the bank, and told her the only way to touch the money was to follow the list of steps he had written. Those steps were slow and public and costly to fake. They would ruin anyone who thought they could steal with a smooth paper or a friendly official. Back in Kijani people read the clauses aloud like a new law. Some old men cursed the loss of easy gain. Some cousins turned pale. But many mothers cried with relief. Nia sat under the same jacaranda where the first rumor spread and felt, for the first time, that the estate had more guards than walls. The news of the trust landed like a stone in water and the ripples did not stop. Relatives who had once smiled at family gatherings suddenly stood in the compound like strangers, voices rising faster than footsteps. At first it was angry questions, the kind you hear when people try to pin down a rumor, but within hours it became a storm. Men in shirts that had known better days came to the gate and pounded it with fists. Women paced the veranda, hands on hips, while others clutched small bundles of old papers and photographs as if these could prove what their mouths could not. Under the baobab tree where the village met to settle small things, the shouting turned sharp. Old friends took sides and old jokes turned into barbs. Names that had been spoken quietly before were now thrown like stones. One cousin in particular, the slick one from Obu, changed from a smooth talker into a public threat. He called meetings and tried to rally support, promising to fix the situation with fast cash and faster promises. When that failed he raised his voice and then his hand, slapping a photo off a table in full view of children. That day a woman filmed his meltdown with her phone and by evening the short video had moved faster than any messenger could. People watched the clip and chose a side. Some said he had lost all shame. Others said Nia had started a war. The pastor tried to calm the crowd and was shouted down. A cousin accused Nia of betrayal and called her names in the market. Another uncle threw a water jug and missed, and the jug shattered like an old trust. Threats were not just words. Someone left a note on the gate that named people and warned of consequences. Someone else spat on the compound wall. Gossip grew teeth and bit. At night the compound did not sleep. Lamps burned, voices whispered plans, and children were sent to stay with neighbors. The family that had once been a single story now felt like a book with torn pages. Yet in the middle of the chaos, small acts of care kept showing up. Neighbors brought bowls of stew to keep tempers from rising too high. A teacher offered to keep the kids safe during school. An aunt who had been quiet for years sat with Nia on the steps and said softly that some things were worth losing sleep for. The scandal echoed beyond the fields and into the town, where people debated who was right and who was greedy. By the time the shouting settled into tense silence, the village had changed. The trust had done more than lock papers. It had pulled back curtains, revealed old hurts, and made the family choose which side of history they wanted to stand on. Nia kept the real plan quiet until the last seal was broken, because she knew that good intentions can be stolen as fast as titles, and she wanted the work to stand before anyone could fight it. The first place she sent money to was a small girls' school that had been patched together from old boards and leaking tin. Its paint was gone, the roof bowed, and the girls sat two to a desk because there were not enough. Nia paid for new desks, clean uniforms, proper books, and a trained teacher who knew how to make children believe they could learn. She also fixed the roof so rain no longer sent lessons flying and put locks on the doors so the girls could leave school at the end of the day without worrying about who would take their place at the table. The second place was a clinic she named after her grandparents, a quiet shelter with a sign that read their names and a small photo of them smiling. The clinic did more than stitch wounds. It brought a midwife who taught mothers how to keep newborns warm and safe. It brought a nurse who could read medicine labels and explain side effects. It installed a clean water tap and a small fridge for vaccines so children would not get sick for want of cold storage. Nia did not hand out cash in the market. She wrote checks to suppliers, met carpenters at the buildings, and watched invoices like a hawk. She hired local people to run the projects so the money would stay in the town and so villagers would feel ownership, not charity. She set up tiny boards of neighbors to check on progress, and she quietly invited elders who had been kind to her grandparents to be patrons, because respect made the work safer. When equipment arrived, she stood at the gate and did not speak much, but she learned names: the young teacher who wanted a proper blackboard, the clinic cleaner who had lost her brother to fever, the girls who laughed when they finally got new shoes. People who had once argued about the estate came to the openings and found themselves moved. The school's first day after the rebuild felt like a festival. Girls lined up in blue uniforms, books under their arms, while men who had shouted the loudest stood at the back and wiped their faces. The clinic's first baby was born with the midwife's hands steady and the mother's eyes bright with relief. Nia kept no speeches. She watched from a distance as small kind things multiplied: a child who could read, a mother who could nurse her baby, a farmer who had someone to treat his fever. The secret plan changed the town quietly and fast. People began to tell the story of the estate not as a fight but as a gift that remembered the grandparents. In kitchens and on porches, the phrase for those they loved grew from a scrap of paper into something people felt they had earned. They pulled Nia into court in Muera like a storm they thought they could ride. The clan said the trust was fraud and that she had no right to lock the estate away. Men who had shouted at the compound now wore suits and spoke in smooth voices. The courtroom smelled of old wood and coffee. Nia came in with the lawyer from Kamba and a small pile of things wrapped in cloth. She did not look like a guilty person. She looked like someone who had expected trouble and had planned for it. When the hearing began, the patriarch stood up and told the judge a story he had told the family for years. He spoke of tradition and blood and rights. He said the papers were forged. He pointed at Nia and called her selfish. Then the lawyer asked for a moment and Nia unwrapped the first piece of proof. It was a ledger her grandfather had kept in a kitchen drawer. The pages had neat numbers, dates, names of people who had worked the land, payments for seeds and for small repairs. The lawyer read the ledger out loud. The numbers matched the elders who had been forgotten. Next came receipts taped together from a dusty cloth bag. They named towns, shopkeepers, and the cousin from Obu. They showed money paid for documents the cousin had promised to use only for fences. The receipts did not smell like lies. Then Nia played a short recording. It was a voice from a meeting years ago. The voice promised to help the family, and then admitted, in an angry whisper, to planning a sale. The sound made the room quiet. The patriarch's face changed. Lawyers who had seemed confident shifted in their chairs. The judge asked for translations and the clerk handed them out. The lawyer from Kamba pointed to dates that matched the ledger and receipts. He asked the court to notice a pattern. The clan tried to call witnesses who would say the ledger was planted. They brought a notary who claimed to have seen different papers. But then a neighbor, old and steady, stood and told how the cousin had tried to mark the trees at night. A teacher from the girls' school came with a copy of a contract the cousin had shown years before. Each new paper and voice stacked up against the patriarch's story. Outside, someone had recorded parts of the hearing and posted them online. The video clipped the moment the ledger was shown and the recording played. Within hours the clip was everywhere. People in other towns sent messages. A hashtag started. Strangers shared memories of similar tricks. The village that had been a rumor became a public story. The trial was no longer just law. It was a place where old wrongs met new eyes. Cameras in phones made witnesses larger than the room. Faces that had been quiet were now heard by thousands. Nia sat and felt the weight of each view, each message. Her hands were steady because she had brought the facts that could not be pushed aside. The courtroom had become a trap for the lies themselves. The judge read the papers slowly, and the room felt as if it held its breath. When he finally said the trust would stand, there was a kind of hush that felt like a door closing on a long argument. Nia let out a sound she did not know she had been holding and watched as the uncle who had led the fight went pale under the courtroom lights. People who had once cheered him at weddings were quiet now, and the confident lines on his face fell away into something softer and smaller. The judge spoke plainly about evidence and law, and when he named the ledger and the taped confession, the uncle's friends could not meet the eyes of the crowd. He left the stand with his head down while whispers followed him like a slow wind. Outside, phones were still hot with the video that had looped through the town all afternoon, and strangers sent messages saying they had seen the same tricks in other places. The uncle felt the shame spread faster than any secret could, but Nia did something that surprised a lot of people: she did not ask for his ruin. In the courtroom, after the formal words and the knocking of gavels, she stood and said she wanted justice, not revenge. She told the judge she would accept a sentence that helped the town. The court agreed on community service connected to the projects in the trust. The uncle would not disappear into fines or exile that would only feed gossip. He would help build the clinic's new water system and teach bookkeeping to the youth who would run the school's small fund. Some called it mercy. Others called it clever. Nia thought of reward and punishment as two sides of a coin and chose a hand that made the town stronger. The decision changed the nature of the public shame, folding it back into work that had to be done. The uncle arrived at the clinic with rough hands and softer eyes, and the first time he carried a sack of sand, a woman who had spat on the compound months before turned her head and walked away. People watched him sweat and gave him tasks that left no chance for private schemes. Over weeks he learned how visible labor and steady records could not be faked. The community watched, measured, and slowly began to speak differently about him. Nia did not post speeches or demand parades. She met families quietly, collected stories of who needed help, and let the projects show proof of change. Critics who had said she started a war saw children learning and mothers carrying vaccines home in cold boxes. The uncle's public fall became part of the repair, not its end. In the evenings, villagers sat by the road and told the story in a new way, about a girl who used law and mercy at once, who wanted accountability and also a town that could heal. The shame kept lessons alive, and the mercy gave work to hands that once used paper as a blade. The result was not perfect, but it made people look up from old fights and start to plan together. Months later the clinic opens and the village seems to breathe easier. On the first morning the nurses turn the key and the door swings wide, a line of mothers already waiting with babies wrapped in bright cloth. Inside, the new shelves hold neat boxes of vaccines, the cold box hums, and a midwife shows a young mother how to hold her child so the baby can warm against her chest. Outside, the old field that once grew weeds is cut and level again. Children race across it in bare feet, shouting and falling and getting back up, while elders watch and smile like they cannot quite believe what they are seeing. The girls from the rebuilt school carry books and sit under the jacaranda to read, their laughter mixing with the sound of a radio that now plays lessons as well as songs. The estate gates were a new sign with Nia's grandparents' names carved into wood, and people call the place by that name when they give directions. Stories that began as whispers at the market become a single story told at every tea and every boda stand, how a quiet graduate took a pen at midnight and turned a family fight into a set of rules that would not let greed win. The relatives who once shouted now come to help paint a wall or plant a mango tree. Some still shake their heads, but most tell the children the simple truth: this land now keeps a promise. Nia walks the paths and greets people without ceremony. She does not sit on a throne or demand thanks. When someone calls her brave, she only shrugs and says she did what she thought her grandparents would have done. The phrase that was on a scrap of paper, "for those they loved," hangs in the parish office and shows up in the mouths of schoolchildren who cannot write the whole sentence yet but say it like a song. What started as a secret act becomes a lesson: wrongs can be named, people can be held to account, and a stubborn kindness can outlast a lifetime of small betrayals. The estate is changed, and so, quietly, is the town.